Hello, welcome everyone. Happy Wednesday. We're halfway there. Thank you all for taking some time to join us for How High Growth Teams Are Building Better with Nearshore Talent, presented by Global Sourcing Brief and sponsored by Remote Team Solutions. I'm Tara, the webinar manager of Global Sourcing Brief, and I am so excited to bring you this new session that will really help you build or refine a nearshoring strategy that supports scalability and rapid onboarding and long-term alignment with your organizational growth goals. I'm really looking forward to hearing from Ron Fish today and what I'm sure is going to be a really valuable discussion. And just so you know, this webinar is SHRM and HRCI approved. Please note that in order to receive your activity IDs, you must be present here with us live for at least 50 minutes. That's 50 minutes. We will be recording this session in case you do need to leave early, and it will be sent to you by email within 48 hours. Activity IDs cannot be provided to those who only view the recording. Up next, before we go any further, I just want to pause and thank Remote Team Solutions for sponsoring this webinar and helping us to make it happen. RTS is the premier nearshore staffing service from Mexico for U.S. companies. RTS gives you your own office in Mexico, and they provide top 5% talent at 60% less than hiring locally and have an astonishing 2% turnover rate. RTS recruits specifically for your needs, be it a VP of software development, a sales manager, customer service rep, or financial analyst. You make the hiring decisions, but RTS becomes the employer of record, keeping your life simple. Your full-time dedicated team will work from within their state-of-the-art facility in Mexico. And RTS takes culture seriously, so they provide on-site HR, IT, a wellness center, and a training academy, all included in one flat fee with no long-term contracts. Additionally, direct flights from the US make it easy to visit your team in Mexico, as most of their clients do. RTS's clients range from startups to publicly traded companies, and as a multi-award winner from Clutch, Business Excellence, and Upcity, with accolades from New York Weekly, LA Wire, and CBS, RTS is consistently recognized as the best. So thank you again to Remote Team Solutions for sponsoring. Up next, let's quickly go ahead and get a few technical things out of the way. Please don't hesitate to ask any questions you have during today's presentation. You can do so by submitting your questions into the Q&A panel, which is found in the toolbar at the bottom of this webinar window. And great questions always contribute to a great discussion as we go. Also, feel free to stick around for our dedicated Q&A near the end of the hour to get even more insights and advice from our panelists. The chat is also available for you to share your thoughts and comments there. Remember to change the blue button in the chat box to everyone to join the conversation. And feel free to share with us where you're joining from in the chat. I would love to see it. The React feature is also a fun one. You can feel free to click it and react to any part of today's presentation that resonates with you. Closed captioning is available for this webinar as well. And to enable this feature, you can find the Show Captions option in the toolbar at the bottom of the window. And lastly, if you have any audio issues during today's presentation, you may choose to dial in by phone, and all dial-in information can be found in the confirmation email you received from Zoom. I can also relay it to you in the chat at any point if you need it. Up next, again, today I am so excited to hear from Ron Fish. Ron is a global talent acquisition executive and thought leader with over 20 years of experience scaling recruiting operations across multiple continents. He specializes in building agile and high-performing teams and designing scalable hiring strategies that align with business growth. And he brings deep expertise in global and nearshore staffing models, combining innovation, technology, and a candidate-first mindset to drive results. So, Ron, without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Awesome. Thanks for the warm welcome, Tara. I remember that 20 years of experience. I used to be proud that I had 10 years of experience, 12 years. Now I just sort of cut it off at 20. So I just let the gray hair of wisdom speak for itself. I keep it a little spiky so you know I'm still a little dangerous, but we'll jump in here and hopefully I can share some of that wisdom with the group that'll help with your potential for nearshore strategies. So, welcome everybody. For an agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about the evolution of talent strategies, looking at the traditional offshore model, how maybe that's evolved to more of a nearshore focus, and all of the advantages from driving nearshore staffing as opposed to that traditional model. Why nearshoring, in my view, probably our sponsor's view, is greater than offshoring. A lot of advantages there. Benefits of nearshore staffing. We'll drill down and talk about some of those real specifically today. We'll talk, give a high level framework on building a nearshore strategy from the standpoint of either kicking that off or if you've begun that process, really talk about the elements you should be thinking about from that standpoint. I'll talk about an ROI, a case study. It's an example from my career that's very relevant today, and then we will save time for Q&A towards the end. With that said, Tara will let me know if there's something pressing or a really interesting question during the presentation on a given slide. She'll let me know and we can answer some of the questions live during that relevant part of the topic as well. All right, I'd like to have a little bit of fun to start with. I see the chat is already active. Everybody's sharing where they're from. I even saw somebody has transitioned, I think, from Texas to Mexico. So a lot of relevant elements there. But I'm a big fan of Would You Rather? And this is a fun one. So let's get that chat active and tell me, would you rather fight one horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses? This has me in a quandary typically. I think the thought of that gigantic duck with that big beak and those webbed feet is a little terrifying. But then thinking about 100 little horses running at me can be scary as well. But I think I'd fare a little better against the horses. So I'm seeing from the chat, it looks like we've got a lot of different thoughts. Some are going with the horses. Maybe we're leaning towards the horses a little bit. Some that want to take on that duck. Maybe they think they can throw a saddle on it and ride it around. That might be fun. Actually, riding a horse-sized duck. I think I'd be a big fan of trying to ride a horse-sized duck if it wasn't going to bite me. So yeah, funny. Yeah, the duck is edible, John. I was thinking about that. That'd bring a whole new meaning to like your turducken for Thanksgiving if you celebrate that. And if you eat duck, certainly could you could fit a turkey inside the duck. I think it'd be a maybe a duck turkin. I don't know. Anyway, enough of the corny jokes. We'll we'll jump in here. So we're going to look at nearshore staffing kind of through the lens of it being a smarter strategic alternative to offshoring. I'm not suggesting you abandon offshoring altogether, but I am suggesting that if you're not leveraging nearshoring, it may be time to really explore that and integrate that into your staffing strategy and some ways that you can do that. So just to really clarify what we're talking about, over on the right-hand side of the screen, especially a lot of people are familiar with offshoring in India. We look at that distance across the globe from offshoring to onshore, and we're talking about US as our hub, our onshore hub. You can see there's quite a distance there, 14-hour plus plane ride for teams to collaborate. If we look at US and we talk about nearshoring, we're predominantly focusing on Canada and Mexico. With that said, some companies, my own companies in the past, have also sort of, trickled down into South America as well, where there are some advantages, even lower costs in some countries there. But obviously, that distance always can be a challenge. So we'll mainly focus on talking about Canada and Mexico. I'll talk a little bit about South America as well. All right, so our traditional offshore model, I showed you a graphic of that. You can see it again here on the right-hand side. Let's look at some of the pros. Traditionally, cost-effective tech talent, 24/7 operations. You can have individuals working around the clock in conjunction with your US team, or perhaps have folks in offshore locations working 24 hours, working different shifts, and then niche talent. To talk about some of those pros in a little bit of detail, the cost effective nature of tech talent, I've really seen that evolve. Saw it evolve a number of years ago, but most recently at my most recent employer, we were finding that hiring a software engineer in the US compared to a software engineer in India, I think we used to get like 5 or 6 to 1, 5 or 6 in India to one software engineer in the US at the higher cost side of things. Now we're lucky if it's like 2 to 1. So then when we consider the other cons, is it actually worth it? Or are we getting the cost benefit that we used to? And should we continue to stick with that as our only strategy? Looking at the cons, historically, communication, language barriers, sometimes it's just sort of cultural, like things mean a little different thing in a different culture. Natural approaches or natural tendencies or instincts are a little different in different cultures, depending on our upbringing, just like they can be from East Coast to West Coast in the US. So, challenges there that can lead to quality control issues where we have a lot more errors, a lot more error rates, a lot more challenges that we need to manage, or a lot more kinks we need to work out of our processes. Um, we look at the execution versus the value. Are we executing effectively, and what is the value we're getting? Is the value what we expected or not? And then high staff rotation. There can be high turnover in some of those offshore locations as well. So now a high level on nearshoring advantage, we're going to drill into some of these areas and talk in quite a lot more detail about it. General nearshoring advantage, the ability to speed up product development. So we're talking about our software engineering, our technical teams with better collaboration, with more cultural sort of fit. We can sometimes speed up product development cycles. Cost savings and budget, I'll share some numbers and some data points on that. Simplified hiring, how could it be simplified? We'll talk about that as well. The cultural nuances there, the proximity, the closeness of those nearshore entities. Faster partnership start, especially if you are starting out your nearshoring journey with a partner, you're not hiring directly into your company. That can really help you get some legs under things pretty quickly, expedite and sort of turbocharge your efforts. The time zone alignment, we'll harp on this a bit. Clearly, those time zones can be very impactful if we don't have, our day is your night and your night is our day kind of scenarios. The cultural and language fit, there can be a lot of synergy there. Um, Much easier in-person visits. We'll talk about that, a couple of those specific data points. And then diversifying your talent marketplace, right? You're maybe achieving some of those diversity goals or those inclusion goals by simply opening up the nearshoring aspect of your staffing. So let's do our first of two poll questions. I'll have Tara cue this up for us. You'll see this pop up on your screen. But what's your current experience with nearshore staffing? If it's a little different, we can chat about that, or you can share it in the chat. But pick the one here that's the closest to what you have. Whether you use it extensively, you're brand new to it, had never even heard of it until this webinar, that sort of thing. Let's talk about that.
Thanks, Ron. And yeah, just encouraging everyone to jump in and select the answer option that most resonates with you. Um, the spread, it's kind of surprising to me, Ron, but maybe not for you as someone who sees this stuff daily. Okay, last call for anyone who wants to jump in and select their option. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this and share the results with everybody. Okay, Ron, can you see those?
I can.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so it looks like we've got a sort of a mix between we use it extensively to we don't use it at all. So that we use it extensively, maybe I'm a little bit intimidated. Some of you may have some expertise or be able to teach me a few things, but at the same time, knowing that there are plenty that are not familiar at all, or some are just exploring it, I think it's a great time to be researching it because you can't plan too much when it comes to this. So appreciate everybody's contributions there and sharing that. So let's talk about that time zone alignment. I love this graphic on the right hand side. Those colors really resonate and show the time zone alignment and how similar it is. So nearshore staffing, if you've worked with offshore counterparts, not uncommon. You send an email, you send a Teams message or Slack message, and you might not hear an answer until overnight, or you think to yourself, well, by the time I get to my desk in the morning, I'll hopefully have an answer to that. If you look at this, the yellow band there that covers much of Mexico, in fact, the lion's share of Mexico, and a quarter of Canada, that's Central Time, everybody. So, I'm sure you work with individuals. You're on the East Coast, you're on the West Coast. You work with people in Central Time. You've got great collaboration in the US, even though there's a couple hour difference, but a lot of overlap. You can also enjoy that from the nearshore staffing perspective, where there's a lot of alignment. You can solve issues much more quickly. That's where we're talking about that product development. We can have real-time collaboration. We're not having things fall through the cracks as much because it's taking time to answer, to get responses. We're not sending the message at the ideal time of the day when somebody's going to see it, that sort of thing. It can help with your project management overall. And then just those geographically closer teams, I can't explain it, but it feels different. When you have somebody who I can potentially drive a car to get there or take a short flight, a couple hour flight, and be in a place where we can collaborate, it just feels different. And it's great for collaboration overall. Now we'll dig into cultural alignment and compatibility. So, and I'm speaking from my experience. Some may have experienced different things, and I think there are always nuances. Every environment, every company is a little different. So you do have to tailor this for yourself. But we do find that in the Latin America countries, there is a high English proficiency. In fact, by data point, many of the countries rank in the top 35 globally for English skills. Now, there are differences. There also are individuals that are better suited for something client facing where they need to speak regularly with native English speakers. So you do have to consider that and look at that from your own standpoint of if we need a lot of very much client facing individuals or internal facing individuals that need to interact with native English speakers, we need to consider that as part of our talent strategy, right? We need to drive from those locations, maybe where those individuals exist, or it needs to be part of our screening process. Cultural compatibility. Canada, Mexico, Latin America, there are a lot of similarities even when it comes to cultural things like holidays. There are some holidays that are similar. A lot of sort of those Western business norms that are not as much of a cultural disparity as they can be in some international countries that are located very far away, which helps with ease of onboarding folks. Education quality. Latin America's really stepped up over the last many years. They're producing a lot more STEM and business grads that are focused around those US standards, not just local standards. So finding a lot of individuals that have the right level of education out of the gate, so you can even do some things from that early in career or campus perspective. Easier onboarding. I talked about the cultural similarities a little bit. That can help with ease of onboarding. One thing that we experienced is that often when we were doing offshoring, we had to almost rebuild our onboarding program to better fit the culture. Didn't have to do that quite as much when we're doing things onshore in Canada or Mexico there are a lot more Western similarities that don't require us to always sort of like completely revamp our onboarding or significantly revamp it. We talked about those, the ability to interface with clients, that higher English fluency, and the cultural awareness sort of makes for ease of conversations. Something that often got overlooked that I've experienced is that even some of the, individuals' first and last names are more common between the countries Mexico, US, and Canada, which makes for a little bit more ease of pronunciation, maybe just the social aspect of it. It doesn't feel as intimidating. Somebody that has a very long name, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Now, that happens to me in the US as well, right? There are times where I wouldn't even take a shot at pronouncing somebody's name. I'm just going to ask how to do it. But at the same time, a lot more similarities there. So there are some nuances that are also an advantage as well that I've experienced, especially when hiring recruiters where their name is not going to be as difficult to pronounce, or they're not maybe going to be viewed as, oh, this could potentially just be a sorcerer that's located in some other country somewhere. And I'm not sure if they're calling me about a real position. We did find some small advantages like that as well. Then we look at untapped talent. If your company is not leveraging nearshore at all, then you literally have a whole new market you can explore. So now instead of just looking at the concentrations in the U.S., you now are looking at the nearshore markets like Canada and Mexico. Um, Sometimes those environments could be much less competitive because there aren't as many companies that are recruiting in those regions, as many US companies recruiting in those regions, competing for that talent. I was mentioning sort of those fresh talent pools. You're gaining experience, or you're gaining access to those highly skilled and even underutilized professionals in new regions. And a big advantage is I found that a US-based company is very appealing to individuals in those other locations because many of them have designs on potentially relocating at some point, or it's exciting for somebody earlier in their career to be able to do an assignment where they come to the US for a year. They're able to more easily acquire a visa to come to the US and do an assignment and get more life experience and have that opportunity, just like it's exciting to think of myself early in the career to go to UK or go to Paris or somewhere to do an exotic assignment can be very attractive and appealing. Recruiting advantage, if you're an early mover in your space, you're somebody that's moving to the nearshore staffing side of things, you can often become an employer of choice and make more brand headway than you might make in the US as a smaller brand. There could be an opportunity there to quickly burst onto the scene, especially in a given city. In Mexico, if you're focused in Monterrey or Guadalajara, Mexico City, potentially burst onto the scene and become a little bit more known because of that US connection. And then something that many don't think about is companies do have diversity initiatives. We're looking to hire a diverse talent pool, looking to bring in new perspectives, essentially drive innovation with all of those perspectives. You're doing that at the same time when you're leveraging those nearshore talent pools, especially from the Latin America side of things for US companies. Couple of the proximity benefits, I'll drill in a little bit here to talk about those. So ease of travel, it's easier to travel between Mexico and US, US and Mexico, Canada and the US. Canadian citizens can, come to the US to work on the back of their passport. I don't mean extended work. I mean for like a business trip sort of thing. Visa wise, coming from Mexico can be quite a lot easier than if I'm trying to travel to or from India, as an example, from other countries as well. So it enables, that quicker collaboration, or if we need somebody to come to the US to solve problems for a client on site for a 3-month gig, via a TN visa, we can now do that coming from those companies with that proximity. So if you're not familiar with the TN visa, previously it was the NAFTA, under the NAFTA agreement. Now it's the USMCA. Canadian and Mexican professionals can obtain TN visas in order to allow that relocation for a temporary assignment, or renew that visa to continue that extended assignment for an individual. Now there are some guidelines around that. Not every skill set is relevant for the TN visa, so you do have to explore that as well to ensure that you're going to be able to meet your goals and that the individuals you're looking for those temporary assignments are going to essentially have a high probability of visa approval. But with that close proximity, now suddenly team meetings, we're not having somebody get on a 14-hour flight from a country that is 7 or 8 thousand miles away. We're talking about somebody who might be jumping on a flight from a proximity in Mexico or Canada, a few hours, which is no different than traveling, from one coast to middle of the country, even one coast to the other. So lots of advantages there. Cost benefits there. I know companies aren't investing in a lot of team collaboration these days. It certainly is not as advantageous or beneficial with those very high costs coming from international countries that have oceans, bodies of water between, but certainly coming from the nearshore locations can be much more feasible for countries or for companies, sorry. All right, we're going to jump into poll question number 2. Tara will cue this up for us. What is your biggest challenge that you face in global hiring today? Um, it sounds like more of you maybe than we expected are actually in nearshore hiring. So it'd be interesting to hear from everybody. If you do have something that's not listed here, feel free to share in the chat. But give us the answer that fits closest. Tara?
Thanks, Ron. And while we kind of pause and let everyone submit their answer here, Pete in the chat made a great point that it makes it much easier to travel for a US trade show or training as well. So that's a great point. Um,
Absolutely. For those events that it'd be nice to have the experts that are in a specific region. Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And we will, oh, okay. So there's a clear winner here. And this one, I'm excited to share the results. I'm going to do a last call for anyone who hasn't popped in and chosen an option here. Okay. All right.
Drum roll. Let me
Go
do a drum
ahead.
roll.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and close this and I will share results. Okay, Ron, you can see those?
Interesting. Yeah.
Great.
So talent quality is one out for sure. Just about half of everybody that voted. So very interesting data point. So I think that, what we're talking about here, just commenting on this, what we're talking about here is kind of right on the mark. Now exploring a new talent pool can be a big advantage for those of you that are experiencing that talent quality. So instead of kind of recycling the same individuals, if you're now exploring the Canada and or Mexico or other parts of Latin America markets, certainly there can be an advantage. You're just sort of broadening your talent pool. So if you're running your talent maps, I'd encourage you to generate talent insights on what you're achieving in the US from a talent supply perspective. Add in Canada, add in Mexico, really take a look at how are we expanding our talent pool. And then on the same token, make sure you're doing that before you explore this, right? And I'll talk about that a little bit, but look at those talent maps. So if that is the biggest pain point that you have, make sure you're choosing a location that's going to benefit. Just simply going to nearshore staffing doesn't mean it's going to be successful. So do your research and plan, like I already said. All right, so I want to hone in a little bit on some of the nearshore cost benefits, and I'll talk about a case study. I did say that I've actually done this before, seen success for sure. So from a cost benefit analysis standpoint, Latin America salaries in general are typically 60 to 70% lower on average than the US equivalents. I've done most extensively hiring in Mexico, hiring recruiters in Mexico, hiring lots of talent in Mexico. We typically found that it was roughly a 50% cost benefit. Now, that was without a partner. There could be some additional cost if you're leveraging a partner or have other costs that I didn't have, but roughly saw that we were hiring in Mexico for about 50 cents on the dollar compared to a high cost US resource, whether it be a software engineer, financial analyst. Some skill sets, there might have been a little bit more of a savings, a little less of a savings if they were at a premium in the particular geo that you're recruiting in. Canadian wages are 30 to 40% lower than the US. We really take advantage of that exchange rate when we talk about Canada salaries. And what I've experienced, which is interesting, is a lot of times if I'm hiring somebody in the US for 120K, that 120K kind of translates to Canadian dollars in many cases, where if I'm hiring for somebody for 120,000 US dollars, I can often hire that individual with that same skill set for 120,000 Canadian dollars, which is interesting. So you can directly look at the cost benefit. Now, there are times where it's even, significantly less than that. So don't go with that as a quote. Don't quote me. Do your own market research. Get intel from your recruiters that are actually out there in the market. They can share that because it can vary depending on skill set, demand of skill set, demand within specific regions, specific cities as well. Typically, you'll find that nearshore hiring can cut your cost per hire as much as 50%. I sort of highlighted that, but when we're talking about cost per hire, all of those costs that go into factoring how much does it actually cost us to hire one individual at the company. If we look at that broadly, if we look at that regionally, typically we can reduce that by about 50%. And again, depending on the exact scenario you're working in, don't quote me. I'm not promising you'll have an absolute 50% cost savings, but certainly that number can be achieved, and I've been able to do that. There's a greater cost predictability when we're talking about Latin America, talking about Mexico, and lower turnover. I think Tara highlighted a data point that our sponsor here highlighted that they've had a very low turnover rate. So that sort of echoes this point that there's an element of loyalty. People perhaps don't change jobs. There's more of a culture of that loyalty, and you have less job hoppers in some of the markets, especially if we're highlighting our sponsor in the Mexico location. Nearshore models can deliver 40 to 60% labor savings without sacrificing performance. So again, even if we're talking about the lower number of the 30% in Canada, we're not talking about hiring an individual with like lower capabilities, less skills, and getting that savings, right? We can do that in the US. We can just say, okay, instead of hiring an individual contributor 5 that we need that expertise, we can hire an individual contributor 3, or instead of hiring somebody with 5 years of experience, we can hire somebody that's out of school with 2 years of experience to get that cost savings because our back is against the wall. We're talking about hiring the same quality of practitioner in an adjacent location to the US for this cost saving. So that's really what we're highlighting here, not finding just cheaper talent globally and sacrificing the quality. So here's the case study for you. We were able to reduce our time to productivity. So the time from when somebody joined until they were actually productive and delivering, their deliverables and delivering results. We were reducing that by about 40%. And a couple of things were at play there. One, we did find that we accelerated things with those cultural elements, a little bit of ease of onboarding. Also, notice periods were not nearly as long as they can be in some offshore locations, and namely Eastern Europe. or really Europe broadly, but especially Eastern Europe and India, which have been locations or kind of hidden gems at times over the decades. We were able to reduce that pretty significantly. And then we were hiring talent, as I mentioned earlier, especially in Mexico at about 50% of those US costs, not quite as much of a savings in Canada, but we definitely leveraged Canada quite significantly as well. We were able to do that more directly by hiring the individuals internally. In this example, at a company after this one, we didn't have an entity within the Mexico region, so we did have a partner that we worked with, similar to our sponsor, where they helped us accelerate, helped us begin to grow until we got to a point, a future point where we could establish an entity that was able to then provide the level of benefits, cost structure, and pay that individuals would need to really trust the company and to really attract the talent. I didn't mention that I did hire a recruiting team. In fact, did that in Monterrey, Mexico. So super close, really easy flight for me from North Carolina down to Monterrey to be able to conduct on-site interviews at our location in Monterrey, see those individuals in person, make hiring decisions along with several others from the team. So do a full day of interviews, select talent. We had a really high probability of hire. We were able to, or high probability of success. We were able to be very successful. As with anything, we did have some challenges where individuals were not the best hire we ever made, but overall, I would absolutely go back and do this all over again because it was very successful hiring in Monterey from two perspectives. Number one, close proximity to the US, without a doubt, being in Monterey, very westernized, that similar culture in Monterey, and then hiring that talent there. We were able to cross-train individuals, or some had already recruited in the US. So when our hiring demand was lower in Mexico, when we didn't, weren't hiring as much in Guadalajara, Mexico City, and other cities in addition to Monterey, we were able to then leverage that team to also recruit in the US. So we're able to use them as utility players and have them really, kind of work with us with the ebb and flow to be able to plug their bandwidth in as needed, or if there was just overflow where the teams in the US were overburdened with hiring. So lots of advantages, but we hired software engineers, HR folks, finance folks, number of skill sets across the board in Mexico very successfully. So I see this question from Barbara. I'm going to just answer that directly. It's a great question, Barbara. And what I was alluding to is looking at a partner company. So our sponsor you see here on the left side of my screen, Remote Team Solutions, is an example. They're not the only company, obviously, but you secure that partner. They can help you operate as your brand within that location. Every arrangement is a little bit different, but they can really represent your brand in that location, help you hire the talent you need to be sort of internal. However, they are typically the employer of record. You do establish that business relationship with them, so they're hiring the individuals, but you're making all the hiring decisions. In most cases, you're conducting interviews like you would with anybody, and you're driving that, but hand in hand with that partner until you get to a place where you are able to establish that partnership. And I missed Gerard's question there. Let me go back to it. Yeah, I think the skill sets that I've seen, Gerard, are broad. I mean, they're really across the spectrum. You do have to be mindful, just like in the US, if we're going to go build a new data center in a given location and we're going to put it in a low-cost area like the middle of Iowa or Nebraska or South Dakota, might not be the best place to hire the talent that we need to staff that data center. So you do have to be aware of that. So what I would say is that Monterey, we hired a lot more functional skill sets. when we looked at technical skill sets like software engineers, network engineers, things of that nature, we were looking more at Guadalajara and Mexico City. So you do have to be aware that different cities can be tech hubs. Some may not be. Just like same with the US, same with Canada. Toronto's a great tech hub in Canada, but there are other hidden gems as well. So definitely, you need to do your talent research there, but you can hire a broad spectrum. We had another question there as well. Stephen, I've been able to do that both from India as well as Mexico very successfully. Be able to use recruiters in Mexico to hire in the US. I think it's a great strategy when recruiting teams and HR teams are strapped for cash. We're not getting as much investment. So it's like, do we go to AI in some capacity or do we hire resources in lower cost regions? What I alluded to earlier, a lot of that name compatibility between the US and Mexico or Latin America can be an advantage. Um, where maybe people get a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt from hiring managers out of the gate, but been able to very successfully do that. So we were intentionally doing that, making sure we had individuals cross-trained for both. But ultimately, we did have some recruiters that transitioned fully to recruiting in the US from Mexico. So that worked out very well. So from a knowledge skills perspective for recruiters in Mexico, we were looking for the same skills as they had in the US. Individuals that had recruited in certain disciplines, we were certainly looking for that. So let's see, we're moving forward on time. I'll save some more questions for the Q&A. But these are considerations, things to think about when you're building your strategy. I already mentioned region and role alignment. Do your talent mapping. Ensure that you're doing your market research. We talked about this question, I think, with Barbara. Look for your partner, your vendor selection, unless you're able to do it internally. If you have entities in these nearshore locations, it can streamline things for you, make it a little bit easier in some ways, but you do have to do all the onboarding considerations and make sure you have that planned as well. Make sure your talent acquisition team has got a process set up. Bring them in early. Don't bring in talent acquisition at the end and just think they're going to figure it out. Make sure you bring them in early so they're part of the strategy from day one. They can help you with talent mapping. They can help you build out your sourcing plan, your interview program, etc. The cultural and communication integration, prioritize language proficiency and cultural fit. Ensure that you understand if this is a customer success role, they probably have to have, pristine English speaking skills if they're talking to US customers. If they're a network engineer, software engineer, working as part of the team. Perhaps the project manager or the engineering manager needs to have that level of communication. Engineers can perhaps have, a lower proficiency level because communication is happening a little bit more directly through the leadership team. Then, ensure that you're considering the legal and compliance elements of things. You're aware of labor laws, ensuring you're not going to fall into any pitfalls, things you can actually pull off that you think you can, tax implications, and then data privacy standards. In the US, we focus mainly around OFCCP, that trumps GDPR in general. But from a GDPR perspective, you have to have those considerations. And don't forget about background checks as well. Background checks in Latin American countries and Mexico can be different, or you might want to add additional elements. So ensure that your background check provider can provide those things. You may need to look into adding an additional background check provider or just anticipate the extra costs in that regard. Ultimately, loop in your leadership, just like you loop in talent acquisition, loop in your leadership team early as well to ensure you have their support, ensure they know that you are going to be building this out from a performance standpoint and evaluate metrics to ensure that you are successful. So, what do those metrics look like? We talked a little bit about time to productivity. That was a big one where we were able to demonstrate we got people ramped up more quickly. They were able to meet our project entry timelines, meet deliverables much more quickly. That was a big advantage for us, in addition to the cost savings. Look at quality of hire, look at cost efficiency. Are we actually getting the cost benefits we anticipated up front? Ron said we'd save 50%. Are we actually saving 50%? Again, every situation is different. You may have additional elements that I didn't have, that could be obstacles. Ensure that you're measuring that, so you can truly demonstrate those benefits. Are you retaining talent? Is it working out the way that we expected it to? And then poll your hiring teams. How is it going? Are hiring managers finding that there's a big benefit? Then can you take a case study, share it with other hiring teams to get them on board as well? Or are there issues that we didn't plan for, we didn't anticipate? We need to kind of refine our approach, retool our approach, or you might be in a situation where it's not the right time for us. We tried the pilot, it's just not working out because we don't have that strong partner in the region. We don't have our own entity in the region. We might have to scrap it. So I'm a big fan of doing a pilot. If it's not working out, let's change something or decide to maybe park it and come back to it at a later point. So some final insights and considerations before we jump into the Q&A side of things. So feel free to start pumping some questions into the chat. We'll try to get to all of them. Remember, nearshoring is not foolproof. I'm kind of alluding to that, but companies definitely fail when they treat it like offshoring or they don't regularly engage those internal stakeholders. So just like individuals in that Western culture, you're going to experience that people want engagement, right? They want to be part of the culture. They want to feel like they're part of the team. I never treated my Mexico recruiting team different than my US recruiting team. We had global team calls. We had regular cadence calls. Everybody was integrated. The opinion of a recruiter in India or Mexico or Canada or the US was just as important, right? Or their input was just as valuable. So ensure, whether you're talking about a software development team or finance team, ensure that you are collaborating and creating that synergy across the teams. Make sure you're realistic about the ramp up timeline. Don't plunge in too quick. Make sure you have your ducks in a row. Plan, plan, plan. You can't plan too much. So if you think that in 30 days you're going to be ramped up and ready to go, maybe you should anticipate it's going to be 3 months or 6 months. Make sure you have the right entry point to take off. Make sure you have the right number of resources in place. Make sure you have your hiring stakeholders on board. Without hiring stakeholders, the whole thing could fall apart just because they're not playing ball with you. Nearshoring shouldn't be looked at as a stopgap. Like, hey, we're having some trouble right now. Let's ramp up and hire 25 people in Mexico to get us over the hump. I mean, if you're going to do that, just look at hiring contingent workers, right? Like, let's not invest in this type of a program. This is really a way that you can scale sustainably and you can enhance your company culture, grow culture, and create more of that global organization. If you are just a US centric company, this gives you that opportunity to begin to create that global footprint. So some final thoughts. I'll just tell you to be very intentional about this. Don't jump in or just expect things to fix themselves. Don't expect to figure it out later. Clearly, there will be bumps in the road. We will hit a pothole or two. But with that said, anticipate, talk about it, look for individuals within the organization that have some experience here. If you don't have the experience and knowledge to bring the program to life, to stand it up, be very intentional about it. And then remember that nearshore staffing is going to offer a lot of benefits: cultural compatibility, the real-time collaboration with the similar time zones. And I think forward-thinking companies are really leveraging this to build fast, flexible teams and really more of that global perspective, bringing in those new perspectives, that innovation. So don't treat it like like offshoring. Establish a strategy that's going to work for nearshoring. Even if you build it on a model you might have used for offshoring, consider it as nearshoring, consider it all the elements that we discussed today, and you'll be successful. Hey, Tara, I'll sort of turn it back to you, or we can jump in and look at the Q&A together, but happy to have you drive that.
Thank you so much, Ron. That was absolutely packed with really valuable information. We did get a lot of great questions that came in through the Q&A, so let's get to those. Before we dive in, just a quick reminder. We understand if you need to run at this point. Again, just know that today's session is being recorded and will be emailed to you within the next 48 hours. And if you have been present during this live webinar for at least 50 minutes, then the SHRM and HRCI activity IDs will also be emailed to you within 48 hours. And if we don't get to your question or comment today, you can please feel free to connect with Ron via the channels on screen. I will also put them in the chat in just a moment. I'm sure he would be more than happy to follow up with you. Um, okay, so let's get to a couple of questions here. Um, let's start with this one from Annie. Have you seen nearshore approaches help to really diversify the workforce? What elements are key to creating inclusive and equitable opportunities across regions?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially companies that are very US centric. It's not uncommon that companies, especially smaller companies, they sort of build from a network, so a lot of people that look like, sound like, tell the same jokes as the founders, as the early entries within the company. Sometimes you don't diversify as much as you maybe expect to naturally. So moving to Mexico as an example, you clearly are diversifying culturally and you're bringing in those new perspectives that can help you look at things through a different lens, different perspectives within a specific discipline, or just overall, you're really diversifying culture. So I think that can happen more naturally versus being as intentional about, hey, hiring manager, here is a diverse slate of candidates. Want you to interview these individuals because of their culture, their gender, that sort of thing, where that can happen more naturally when you are leveraging the nearshore approach, especially when we're looking at Mexico and Latin America, at least in my experience. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. And yeah, if there's any kind of follow-up, feel free to share that with us as well. Moving right along here, a really great question coming in from Mason. How can people managers effectively lead, hybrid teams that include nearshore and onshore employees without creating silos or disparities? Any advice?
Absolutely. And the silos and disparities absolutely happen. I think a lot of it comes to empowering the team. So, myself as a leader, I'm a big fan of building teams. I say teams of independent thinkers that are empowered to make decisions within their purview. So with that being the case, I think if you empower those individuals to speak out, to have those discussions, I've seen US opinions sometimes supersede opinions of individuals in other regions. If you favor that in that capacity, you're going to kind of build that culture. But I'm a fan of driving that behavior very specifically and encouraging, or really almost insisting, that everybody shares their perspectives and their feedback. But also, if you get a great suggestion, let's say we've hired a new team in Mexico and you get a great suggestion from that team in Mexico, elevate that, right? I'm also somebody who's not, I don't always have the best ideas. I'm not always the smartest person in the room. Um, so I'm quick to elevate my team's views, their opinions, their great ideas, to amplify those. So when you do that from those other regions, that can really be a game changer to help people feel empowered and then always have their back when things hit the fan, we'll just say it that way. Have their back. When you know that they've done the work, they've worked hard, they've been diligent, but things just kind of went sideways, wasn't their fault. Have their back and don't make an example out of them as a bad behavior. So a few tips that I've experienced and leveraged successfully.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Ron. Okay, moving right along. Next question coming in from Siranem. How would you recommend structuring your US based HR team to support the talent that will grow nearshore? Do you you assign a role within the nearshore staff to support as a liaison, or how can you really prep your US based HR teams?
Some of that depends a little bit on whether you're leveraging a partner to stand things up and get it off the ground, or you're hiring individuals directly. If you're hiring enough at a large enough scale, I'd recommend having HR be a consideration. You're hiring HR in the region. But with that said, ensure that you're leveraging HR reps or you're hiring people in the US that have those cultural, similarities or sensitivities where they're going to be coming in knowing, hey, I'm managing individuals that while we're a US based company, we have individuals that exist outside the country to ensure that they are getting the same considerations, the same values are being instilled, and that we're driving HR and that HR business partnership in the same way. We're taking those any concerns being raised the same way that we are elevating those, but some of it can come down to ensuring that you do have cultural elements built into the US team. So if you have a diverse US team, sometimes that will be much more sort of socially acceptable, but just culturally acceptable across the board.
Thanks so much, Ron. I think we can squeeze in one more here. Um, do you have any tips? This question, I apologize, is coming in from Brittany. Do you have any tips on how HR teams onshore can best assess and or mitigate any geopolitical or economic risks that are coming in nearshore regions so that everything remains stable?
Yeah, I mean, clearly there are those elements that have to be considered. I think it'll come down to a close partnership with the hiring teams and with the hiring managers to catch those things early, to mitigate those things early, to make changes if changes need to be made. But just because you launch a nearshore program doesn't mean it's going to go off without a hitch. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have to retool along the way. So there will be elements that need to be considered, but essentially be looking for those warning signs, stay closely aligned with the hiring teams, especially in the early stages till this thing sort of gets off and it is running fairly smoothly. Ensure that you are taking those things into consideration, being aware of them, and then partnering closely. And that can be getting feedback from hiring managers if they're sensing any of that sort of unrest across the teams, any other related challenges, so they can relay that back to HR. But I would go and ask the questions and not just wait for a problem to arise.
Yeah, that's great advice, Ron. Thank you. And with that, the really thoughtful answer, that is all the time we have for today. I hope you all learned half as much as I did. Again, if we didn't get to your question today, you can always connect with Ron via the channels in the chat. Before we go, I'd just like to encourage you to participate in the quick 1 minute survey that will pop up in your browser once this webinar closes. We take all of your feedback into consideration, so I thank you in advance. Thanks again to our sponsor, Remote Team Solutions. We couldn't have done it without you. And Ron, a big special thank you to you for answering our questions and providing such a phenomenal presentation today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for all the interactions and really don't hesitate to reach out to me. I love to have these conversations. Continue them on LinkedIn, reach out to me directly. Happy to give you some pointers, and kind of help you get things kicked off. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Thanks, Ron, and a huge thank you to all of you for taking some time with us today. Again, my name is Tara, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week, hopefully an easy rest of your week. Take care.